All right. What is up, guys? It's Zero here, bringing you all a brand new episode of Horror Theory. Welcome, everyone, to Horror Theory, the best horror related show here on YouTube. And I'm super excited about our episode here today. We got a lot of stuff to talk about, so let's get into it. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome, guys, to another episode of Horror Theory. I got a number of things to talk about here. Look, it's late, I know. It's a late one, a late show. I was not expecting to do a show this late, but got out of work really late, and I really wanted to talk about a few things. You know, we haven't been streaming as much as I want to, and that bothers me. I want us to be streaming a lot. We're going to be doing a live stream tomorrow for the Little Nightmares 3 premiere, or they're doing some kind of showcase for Little Nightmares. So I wanted to talk about that. I want to talk about things in the, obviously State of Decay. I want to talk about a couple other games as well. We got a lot of stuff that we want to talk about. And so for those of you who are new to Horror Theory, the way that we do this, guys, is we have a number of predetermined topics that we talk about on the show, and we'll go over those. And afterwards, if there's any, comments, or anyone has any questions that they have that they want answered on the show, we will answer them at the end of the show. And the easiest way to get your question answered on the show is really simple. There's a tip link in the description down below that you can click, and you just leave us a comment, and it also supports the show. So we thank all of you guys who do that, for the super chats and things of that nature. And we will answer those things as long as we deem it appropriate to be addressed on the show. We will do so then. And what's awesome about that tip link is it's good 24 hours a day. So if you don't catch us during a live show, you can use the tip link whenever, and we can answer it on the next episode of Horror Theory. So with that down and out of the way, guys, let's get into it, shall we? So I want to start here. Kind of alluded to it a little bit ago. There's a game coming out, a little game called Little Nightmares 3. And I'm excited about this because Little Nightmares 3 is a game that, I haven't, how should I put it? Little Nightmares is a title that I really, more recently than anything, actually started playing. Between the first one to the second one, reminds me a lot in certain ways of Limbo. Was kind of a game that it reminds me a lot of, and in different ways, right? I mean, they're not like a copy and paste or anything of that nature, but Little Nightmares is a fascinating title to me. It truly, it's a really fascinating title. I love it. I think as a horror title, there are things that are, certainly creepy about it, but I just love that it's a game that exists, because for a team, or a game development team like the games Limbo, Inside, I've always wanted like more games like that, more regularly. And because, we had Inside, we haven't had really anything since then, kind of within that same somewhat ecosystem or universe. And so I would love to see a continuation of the Limbo Inside world. But Little Nightmares is certainly one that can quench our thirst while we're waiting for something like that, or just, be its own thing. Little Nightmares has got a really solid fan base at this point in time. I'm going to switch screens here, because Little Nightmares is pretty fascinating. And they've posted on their X page something unsettling is coming. It's closer than you think. Are you ready to face it, little ones? Hashtag little nightmares. And so here's the thing with that. Not only does it say, something unsettling is coming, it's closer than you think. Obviously, guys, we are the eve of the showcase that they're going to be showing us something in relation to Little Nightmares. So June 24th, we'll be able to watch it on my time zone, 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I'm really excited about it. We're gonna live stream it tomorrow, guys, on Horror Theory. We're gonna live stream this. Could be something really cool. But there is a premiere of the Little Nightmares showcase. What's interesting though is it also seems that, you know, obviously this is the first Little Nightmares title that's going to have co-op. And so I want to talk about this as well. This is coming to us from LB Beastad of Game Rant. Little Nightmares upcoming showcase may offer a 2-for-1 special. So the state of Little Nightmares 3 has been a huge mystery as developer Supermassive Games and publisher Bandai Namco have kept tight-lipped about the third entry in the adorably disturbing horror series. Little Nightmares 3 is a first for the series as it brings a co-op option to its gameplay. It's a compelling evolution of the franchise's formula, and fans may get to learn more information very soon. So, the Little Nightmares 3 team recently went to X to announce a special showcase. The announcement in question was merely a 13-second clip that revealed the premiere date and respective airtimes, but it's the most substantial update fans have gotten in months. After facing a delay and being kept in the dark, Little Nightmares 3 will hopefully finally announce a release date at this event, but there's another announcement that could be waiting in the wings as well. So, obviously, I think what everybody is expecting here from Little Nightmares 3 in terms of the showcase is a release date, right? I think everybody's expecting that. Everyone's expecting it to be this year in 2025, not to get pushed, into 2026. So I think it's reasonable to expect a announcement. But is there more that they're going to show off? I'm sure there's probably going to be something. Could they be giving us a beta, something that we can play immediately, or a demo, right? Something that we're able to like kind of jump into where they give us kind of a teaser of what the game's going to look like, things of that nature, or how it's going to feel, I guess you could say, for the masses. About 2 weeks ago, a listing showed up on the PlayStation Store showcasing an enhanced edition of Little Nightmares. The listing quickly disappeared, but it was on the site long enough for a lot of fans to take notice. Speculation about an enhanced Little Nightmares is nothing new. Way back in January 2024, an ESRB rating for Little Nightmares Enhanced Edition was noticed by eagle-eyed gamers, quickly fueling anticipation. So, however, as the year came and went without such a version being released, it seemed as though an updated Little Nightmares might never arrive. After the PlayStation Store leak, though, it looks like Supermassive Games may have more than just a release date for Little Nightmares 3 up its sleeve. 2025 has promised plenty of unique horror games to look forward to, and Little Nightmares 3 being added to the list would be a welcome addition to the expected lineup. Games like The Midnight Walk have already brought horror fans a terrifying experience balanced with a breathtaking art style, and will be interesting to see how Little Nightmares 3 evolves the charming look that it has become known for. I have not I haven't played Midnight Walk yet, guys. I'm very interested to play that. There's no doubt. I think that there are certainly things that look interesting about the Midnight Walk, but nonetheless, I'll definitely get to that at some point or another. That being said, the big question that I think a lot of people are asking themselves right now is, will Little Nightmares release this year? Is this going to be a game that comes out this year? Because a lot of fans of the franchise have been, like they said, kept in the dark, at least at this point in time, about the title. And so, where are we at? Is it going to happen? What can we kind of expect here? Well, all will be revealed, obviously, guys, tomorrow. Um, but a 2025 launch date seems to be a likely bet. Originally planned to be released in 2024, the game was hit with a delay as Supermassive Games aimed to launch in the following year. Now that 2025 is well underway, it would be the ideal time to make an announcement considering the franchise's spin on the horror genre. Little Nightmares 3 may arrive sometime in the fall. This would only make sense since it would be a great option to get into the Halloween spirit. However, this also presents the game with significant competition. I think a Halloween, release for Little Nightmares would probably be a good time, maybe a little bit ahead of it, like in September, would make somewhat, some sense. I think a really good move, though, would be for Supermassive Games to bring Little Nightmares 1 and 2 to PlayStation Premium Plus or Xbox Game Pass. You bring it to one of those or even both of them. I mean, gosh, it would be, I think so that people are able to play the games within the subscription services immediately so that, they can kind of get ramped up and understand, what the story's all about as we're moving into Little Nightmares 3. I think it makes a lot of sense. I know on Xbox Game Pass they still have like Inside, but they don't have Limbo anymore. So like Limbo and Inside, very obviously they're different in ways, but similar. They have a lot of similarities. And so with Little Nightmares, I think it would be good where people who are not super familiar with the franchise at this point, they're like, oh, there's 3 Little Nightmares already. It's like, they're a lot of people might not want to go back and play the other ones, especially if they have to pay for them. But if it's included in a subscription service, might make a lot of sense for people to at least give them a try. And once you give Little Nightmares a try, it really is a fascinating title. So here's the deal, guys. The horror games that are slated for to launch this fall, it really is starting to get a little bit packed with different games. Now, what I will say though is we got to kind of take some of this stuff as you want, guys, but I don't think that this is the heaviest hitting, horror year in around Halloween this year, besides Silent Hill F. Silent Hill F is going to be big. I mean, you can just tell from the way that the game looks, very different, but it also has, that Silent Hill vibe. And man, I think Silent Hill F is going to be something really special. Definitely something to keep your eyes on. Directive 8020 is another really fascinating one. I really want to see more about Directive 8020. There's a lot of things about this game that I'm really intrigued by. Obviously, this is coming to us from the guys and girls that made Detroit Become Human. It's another like anthology game, Until Dawn. So I'm going to tell you this. I'm excited about Directive 8020. But do I think it's going to be a really heavy hitter, in Halloween? I have a hard time believing that. I mean, I think that it could be one of those games that launches, doesn't really do well at launch, but if it's a really good game, it could be kind of like a Days Gone type of ordeal where it picks up momentum as time goes, especially if it releases on some of the subscription services, things of that nature. And that leads us to Chronos, The New Dawn, which I think is another one that could very well be a decent sized title, especially for those people who are into games like the Callisto Protocol, Dead Space. Chronos is going to be that, game that kind of maybe is a cure for that itch for people who, want to play a new Dead Space. We'll be talking about Dead Space here shortly on the show. But for those of you who, after beating Dead Space, and if you already played the Callisto Protocol, Chronos will probably be the next best thing. So yes, guys, you got 3 games that are going to be, probably going to be some solid horror titles. in Silent Hill F, Directive 8020, as well as Chronos: The New Dawn. Um, could Little Nightmares 3 kind of fit within that ecosystem? I think it could. I really do. But I think it all comes down to Supermassive Games being very tactical here about placing Little Nightmares on Xbox Game Pass, releasing it on PlayStation Premium Plus, so that everybody gets a chance to play those before the release of the game. And so it'll be interesting to see when they decide to release it. I'm hoping that they don't end up pushing it, back into 2026. But we'll have to wait and see, and I'll keep you guys up to speed as we get more information about it. But so that being said, guys, I think we have to keep our eyes peeled for fall of this year, Halloween specifically, because I think Little Nightmares may very well have a lot more competition if they were to wait until releasing like in 2026. I think there's a very good chance, though, that they're going to release the game this year and they're going to announce it tomorrow at their showcase. But I'll be sure to keep you guys up to speed as we get more information about Little Nightmares 3 and all of the things that get announced there. We'll be doing a live stream, like I said, for Little Nightmares 3's showcase. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about Little Nightmares 3. What are you guys most excited about? Do you think it's going to release this year? Do you think it'll be next year? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section down below and let us know your thoughts. And with that down, guys, and out of the way, let's move on to this. I'm going to switch screens here really quick. So, guys, one of my favorite horror games of all time, I mean, and this goes back a number of years. I would say that, how can I put this? I think that there's a number of horror games out there that I have been a massive fan of over the years. From the initial release of their first game all the way to where we are now. I've enjoyed most of the titles within this franchise, and I believe it's one of the greatest shooter horror games, horror shooter titles that's ever come out, and that being Dead Space. And I want to talk about Dead Space, guys, because Dead Space 4 is a game that I have wanted to see, ever since the release of Dead Space 3. Because Dead Space 3, guys, if we go back, we had Dead Space 1 and 2, which I believe were two of the best horror, I would say horror shooter games I've ever played, closely observed. Like, I think that the first two Dead Space titles were unreal, incredible titles. Dead Space 3, though, was where I feel like they took a step in the wrong direction. They prioritized, this action over horror when you got to the third game, whereas the first two games was horror over action. There was certainly action, but they wanted to prioritize this very dark, gritty atmosphere within Dead Space to give you this very unnerving feeling. And ultimately, when we got to Dead Space 3, I just felt like EA was specifically trying to chase a trend, which was, action games over horror, and it just didn't make much sense. And so ultimately, after Dead Space 3 came out, sales weren't good. A lot of people were pretty critical of the title, the change of pace and everything else. And Dead Space went into a limbo state, a state of almost no return. And then all of a sudden, I should say it was like a month after the Callisto Protocol released, which was from the makers of Dead Space, the Dead Space remake came out from Team Motive over at EA. And the Dead Space remake, I thought was great. I thought it was outstanding. I loved it. I thought, it kind of really captured the magic of what Dead Space is all about once again for me. But it was, it kind of brought up the question like, okay, are they going to bring out another Dead Space game, or is this the, is are they going to do a Dead Space 2 remake, Dead Space 3 remake? Are they going to do a Dead Space 4? And so I want to talk about this specifically because I think it's important. Dead Space is one of the most iconic horror games of all time. Um, when it came out, Glenn Schofield and the guys over at Visceral, they had no idea that this was going to be as popular and become such a cult classic title as it became. And you know, they did the first one. Obviously, Dead Space 2, I think, topped the first one. Dead Space 3, massive step in the wrong direction. Dead Space remake, it's like, here we are, we're back. But where are we at this point in time? Well, let's talk about that. So, will Dead Space 4 ever happen? And where is Dead Space 4 at this point in time, guys? So, let's talk about it. So, let me switch screens here. That's the wrong one. Okay. So, right here. So, guys, EA rejected Dead Space 4 recently. This is why. So, guys, this is an article coming to us from Jake Brigstock over at Indie 100. Dead Space is a much loved third person survival horror video game series where players take on the role of the unluckiest engineer in gaming, Isaac Clarke. The gameplay sees Isaac have to fight through hordes of horrific monsters called necromorphs in hugely tense encounters as he battles through them to get to where he needs to be. Obviously, guys, we had the three main entries in the franchise, like the trilogy, I guess you could call it. Three main games were released between 2008 and 2013 with a few spin-offs along the way. Dead Space was also remade in 2023, much to the fanfare of its dedicated fan base. But it's understood that EA thought it did not sell as well as they hoped. It's reported EA thinks the series as a whole has underperformed in terms of sales during its lifespan, and the creators of Dead Space recently said in an interview with Dan Allen Gaming they pitched Dead Space 4 to EA but were rejected. And I'm just gonna, I wanna put this out there, guys. Look, let's say that Dead Space as a franchise didn't make a return or as much of a return for EA as they thought it would, which I have a hard time believing because the first two Dead Space titles, they sold very well. Now, the third game, yes, you could say it was a massive step in the wrong direction. EA they could have very well lost money on Dead Space 3. But then the Dead Space remake comes out, and I think that, yeah, maybe it wasn't as good as they were hoping for, but I'm sure that they were profitable. Now, maybe they weren't. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But here's the thing. Let's just say that it underperformed and EA saying, oh, it's underperformed for, during its entire lifespan. We'll sell the IP then or license it out to another studio who's passionate about Dead Space. And then you guys can reap some of the benefits from when it releases. So I'll give you guys a perfect example of this. Rockstar has the rights to Max Payne. They did a Max Payne 3, but they have done nothing since then. Remedy, the guys who do like Control, and a number of other games, Alan Wake, they have deep roots to Max Payne because they were the ones who worked on the first couple Max Payne titles. And so they ended up acquiring the rights or the license from Rockstar, and Rockstar licensed it out to them. So now they're doing a Max Payne 1 and 2 remake, which I think are going to be absolutely awesome. So what I'm saying is the moral of this is that I don't think that, you've got to just put Dead Space completely on the back burner in a limbo state or a state of no return. Like, just license it out to a studio that is passionate about it. License it out to these guys, Glenn Schofield. I mean, these guys know what they're doing. They have launched some, massive titles over the last number of years. But I think that, when I look at Dead Space as a franchise, and I look at the creators, and not only did they do Dead Space, they then did the Callisto Protocol, which, yeah, the Callisto Protocol, look, the reality is, guys, is that the Callisto Protocol suffered from, Krafton pushing the developers to release the game early when it wasn't fully ready yet, because more than likely they wanted to stay ahead of the Dead Space remake because they thought if they released it after the Dead Space remake, they would just get crushed. But I think if they would have waited, just gave it some time, I think that the Callisto Protocol, I think that I think it would have done really well if it just would have been fully polished because they did polish the game, and I think the Callisto Protocol is awesome. But anyways, I just think it never really got a chance. And the other part that was completely asinine to me is that Dead Space, the remake, came out a month after the Callisto Protocol. So it's like the timing of Crafton and EA was completely crazy. Like it was asinine, asinine. I don't care what anybody says. The fact that they put two games so similar to one another by the creators of Dead Space who created the Callisto Protocol and the Dead Space remake coming out a month later was, I mean, I think it hurt both games. I really do. So nonetheless, guys, it was crazy. I don't know why that whole thing happened, but EA should just license the game out. Just do it. Give it to Glenn Schofield, Christopher Stone, Brett Robbins. Let them like helm this thing. They're saying that they want to do it, and they know what they're doing. I mean, I think we see the track record of Dead Space. We see obviously the Callisto Protocol had a shaky launch, but then they fixed it, and now it's awesome. I love the Callisto Protocol. Nonetheless, Glenn Schofield, Christopher Stone, and Brett Robbins were three of the creative leads on the Dead Space games. Schofield said, we tried actually, the three of us, Dead Space 4, we're talking this year, but he said EA was not interested. We didn't go too deep, Schofield said. They just said, we're not interested right now. We appreciate it, blah, blah, blah. And we know who to talk to. So we didn't take it any further, and we respected their opinion. They know their numbers and what they have to ship and all that. Stone added, the industry being in a weird place with making projects such as Dead Space a hard game to sell. Dude, I'm sorry. I disagree. Completely disagree with that. Dead Space, I has a massive audience from the first two Dead Space titles, even the Dead Space remake, the Callisto Protocol. I think the Callisto Protocol was building a nice sized fan base. Sure. Is it as big as Call of Duty? No, of course not, guys. It's not. It's a survival horror game. There's not a lot of survival horror games that are just absolute juggernauts, right? I mean, you look at games like, Resident Evil, right? That's been a long withstanding franchise. And so it's one of those things. I feel like some of these titles, they just, give it time. They will build over time. But if you don't give it a chance, it's never going to see the light of day. And you got to be very tactical about when you're releasing these games as well. I think that the way that the Dead Space remake was when that was released and when the Callisto Protocol was released, just absolutely made no sense. It reminded me of Battlefield 1, Titanfall 2, and Infinite Warfare releasing all within like the same time frame. It doesn't make sense. Why would you do that? So that's what this kind of reminds me of a little bit. And that's why I think that we're really getting, the big survival horror game this year that would be coming out. We don't even know if it's going to be really big, is Chronos, The New Dawn, which seems to be somewhat of a spiritual successor to Dead Space, as well as the Callisto Protocol, even The Thing, maybe a little bit of some Resident Evil in there. But, outside of that, I think that there is a audience that wants games like this. I mean, I really do. We see it in the numbers from like content. We see it in the numbers from, just sales. I mean, there are people who are trying to get games like Dead Space. So nonetheless, people are really hesitant to take chances on things. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. Who knows? Maybe one day I think we'd all love to do it. Stone then declared he'd make a Dead Space 4. So look, guys, the folks over at Striking Distance Studios, or I should really say, Glenn Schofield, Christopher Stone, Brett Robbins, These guys, the minds behind Dead Space, the minds behind, or I should say, Glenn Schofield helming Dead Space as well as the Callisto Protocol, they want to make another Dead Space title. That should tell you something. Like, if I have Glenn Schofield telling me, "Hey, like, we want to do this," um, and you just have to create barriers of what they can do and stuff. Like, you give them creative control, obviously, and you just give them like timelines as you would with any other game. I think they can make something absolutely incredible. But if you don't listen to them, like how Crafton dumped a lot of resource and development into the Callisto Protocol, and when push came to shove, they weren't listening to the studio when they should release it, and they released it early. And we kind of had a Cyberpunk 2077 situation just in a survival horror game. So, look, will Dead Space 4 ever happen? Guys, I got to tell you, I believe it could happen, but the way I think it happens is EA gives the license to a studio to create the game similar to what Rockstar is doing with Remedy with the Max Payne 1 and 2 remake. Give them the license, give them some resource and development, let them do their thing. And that's what I think that they need to do here. I really do. But nonetheless, guys, I would love to hear your thoughts about it in the comment section down below. Where is Dead Space 4? Is Dead Space 4 ever going to happen? Or a Callisto Protocol 2? Or games, more and more like this, the survival horror games that are similar to Dead Space and the Callisto Protocol. What are your guys' thoughts about it? Let us know in the comment section down below and let us know your thoughts. And with that down and out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about this. You know, let me switch screens here. We talk a lot on the channel about State of Decay. A lot about State of Decay. And State of Decay is in a weird spot. Really strange spot right now. You know, I think that there's something to be said for State of Decay 3 coming out in 2026 or beyond 2026, because we're just in a strange spot with the State of Decay and Undead Labs over there and the development cycle that's been going on over there. It is concerning, to say the least. And we've been talking about State of Decay 3 being a game that obviously we want Undead Labs to take their time with it. But I think all of us can agree that we want State of Decay or Undead Labs to just give us updates on what's going on. And they tease us before the Xbox Game Showcase, and nothing comes out from Undead Labs about State of Decay 3. And, Jeff and I were talking about this, guys, on another episode of Horror Theory, where I brought up the question, is it an Undead Labs issue or is it a higher ups issue? Like the higher ups over at Xbox. Jeff thinks that it's a higher ups issue. Like something's going on at Xbox where, a lot of approvals and things of that nature have to go through so many layers, so many levels. I agree. The more I've thought about it, the more I agree with this. I think that State of Decay 3 is in a state of development hell and has been for a while. Now, I'm not going to, push all the blame to Xbox, because there's definitely issues going on at Undead Labs. There's been a lot of, former employees that have come out, said things about, Undead Labs and the workplace environment and things of that nature. But I think that there is certainly some pushback happening from Xbox as a whole. In the Xbox Game Studios, I don't think this is all on Undead Labs. Um, I think there's definitely something to be said that Xbox is holding up a lot of titles. And it's not just State of Decay 3. Like, make no mistake about it, guys. I think that there is a systemic issue within Xbox right now where, we look at games that should be coming out a lot sooner than they are, and they just aren't because Xbox is pouring, a lot of their resource and development on games that maybe already have like massive fan bases, like Call of Duty Black Ops 7 is coming out. Call of Duty is a massive juggernaut of a franchise. So a lot of their focus is on games like that. But even games like Elder Scrolls 6, we have heard nothing for years about Elder Scrolls 6. Fable, obviously we got something, a couple years ago, or whatever it was, 2024's Xbox Game Showcase. State of Decay 3, very similar, that last year. Gears of War E-Day. We're seeing this. What I'm saying is we're seeing a repeat kind of issue where games are just getting pushed further and further and further along. And I think that Xbox, even though I do think that they have the best subscription service within gaming, and it's not even close, that being Xbox Game Pass, they're releasing all their games, all their first party titles straight to Xbox Game Pass, which I think is absolutely awesome. But there is an issue happening over at Xbox where these games are not getting released on time. And I think what's happening is some of these studios are small and they're not, maybe they don't have the manpower to handle all of the demands from Xbox, like the timelines. And so that's why Undead Labs is working with the Coalition. They're working with Obsidian on different elements of State of Decay 3, and Obsidian's working on Grounded 2. They're working on the Outer Worlds 2. The Coalition's working on Gears of War E-Day and Gears of War Reloaded, but those developers are also helping Undead Labs. So what I'm saying is that I think State of Decay 3 was supposed to come out maybe a while ago, and now it just keeps on getting delayed because they're sending, demos or whatever they're sending to the higher ups at Xbox. There's pushback happening. And so I don't think that this is all on Undead Labs. I think it's also on Xbox. And Jeff and I were talking about this, and I think, we both agree that, yeah, there's issues at Undead Labs, certainly. But Xbox, they're playing a part in this somehow or another. Maybe, there's certain timelines. Undead Labs is, they're supplying what they need or what they need to show. And Xbox is taking a while to get back to them because Xbox is focused on COD. They're focused on Halo. They're focused on Gears or whatever. And so they're pulled in so many directions. They have all these different studios. And so ultimately, it creates issues, for the, for the developers who are trying to meet different timelines, and they're going through all these maybe creative differences between them and what Xbox wants and what the Undead Labs wants. That's where you get concerned about State of Decay 3. The concern is like, okay, you're in a development hell cycle. On top of that, there might be creative differences happening within Undead Labs or maybe between Undead Labs and Xbox. And so this is where we get a lot of concern kind of boiling up, guys, about State of Decay 3, the state of the game, of the studio, of Xbox as a whole, because it's almost like, is Xbox stretched too thin? Like they've acquired all these different companies, but it's like, they can't handle it in some way or another. Now, I'm not saying that they can't, because Xbox is a massive company now, guys. I mean, obviously, I just think that State of Decay 3 to us is a very special title. We want to see this be a great game. And if it means taking the time to make sure that everything's refined and polished and ready to go at launch, we're willing to wait a number of years for that if that's what it needs. But if it's like, Xbox is kind of holding things back because they're working on other stuff. Um, it just, it really isn't doing what they should be for the community, for Xbox players, like the fan base as a whole. And so, do I think that they're stretched a little bit thin? I think Undead Labs certainly is. I think that, Xbox may be as well, with all these different studios, all these different games that are coming out. Hard to say, right? But I would love to hear your guys' thoughts about this in the comment section down below. What do you guys think about, State of Decay 3? And do you think that the issues that we're hearing about are, an Undead Labs issue with the holdups and all that stuff? Or do you think it's an Xbox issue? Um, Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below and let us know your thoughts. And with that down and out of the way, guys, let's talk about this. I got to tell you that I believe that the scariest, I should say, one of the scariest games of all time is the Outlast franchise. Outlast is absolutely terrifying in a number of ways. But here's the thing. State of Decay, I'm sorry, Outlast. What's interesting to me about Outlast is I really want to see an Outlast 3. That's just, I want to see Outlast 3 come out. Obviously, we have the Outlast trials, which I think are great, by the way. And what's interesting is that Red Barrels is kind of taking this approach of like a live service Outlast title, and that's what the Outlast trials are really becoming. Because, let me pull this up really quick. I want to show you guys this. Let's switch screens here. So, Outlast 3, guys, is not a currently released game, obviously. While it was initially announced as a future project, Red Barrels decided to focus on developing the Outlast Trials first. The Outlast Trials is a separate game set in the Outlast universe and was released on March 5th, 2024. Outlast 3 is still planned, but it will be developed after the Outlast Trials receives its planned content updates. So initial announcement, Outlast 3 was announced as a future project with no release date in mind. Red Barrel shifted their focus to the Outlast Trials as a separate project. And look, Red Barrels has stated that they plan to return Outlast 3 after they have completed the planned updates for the Outlast Trials. So when that could be is really, really tricky. Obviously, I'm going to put it to you guys like this. I think that Outlast 2 is one of the scariest horror games ever made. I believe that. I think that what makes Outlast so great is having a horror game where you don't have a weapon, you have nothing to defend yourself, and you're hiding and you're trying to figure out ways to escape and things of that nature. And the Outlast Trials definitely does this as well. But I felt like Outlast 2 was the game, was like sheer terror. Reminds me kind of like Alien Isolation. I thought Alien Isolation was terrifying. I would love to see an Alien Isolation 2, like a sequel to this. And maybe we'll be getting it at some point. I would love to see that, especially with all like Alien Earth and Alien Romulus and all these other, the alien universe as a whole. I would love to see that. But Outlast, guys, is a special title. Will we ever see an Outlast 3? I believe we will. They really have a lot of stuff planned, though. It sounds like with Outlast Trials, they've been releasing content updates, and it's awesome. I love that it's like this live service horror title. I mean, that's really cool. It's a great concept, but I would really love to see them do like Outlast 3. Kind of go back to, a sequel or whatever you want to call it to Outlast 2. Because I think that Outlast 2, what they were building from Outlast 1 to Outlast 2, completely unnerving, terrifying. The Outlast Trials certainly has a lot of scares, a lot of those things. But like I said, they're making that their live service title. So now let's move into, or go back to, kind of that continuation from Outlast 2 with Outlast 3. I think that could be something really special. Um, and like I said, games like Outlast, what make them so unique is just the fact that you can't defend yourself. I love this concept. And it's like, being tactical. You have a story, you have all these different things that you're learning about this world while you are terrified to even, jump out of that haystack, or whatever, whatever it is that you're doing. There's something to be said about the way that Red Barrels has constructed the Outlast games up to this point. And like I said, I don't have anything really negative to say about the Outlast trials. I love that it exists within this universe. And I think that, as we move forward, the Outlast trials more than likely will continue to be a live service horror game, which I think is great. But I would love to see them go back to, doing Outlast 3, continuation from Outlast 2. I think it could be something really, really special. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about Outlast and where Outlast 3 is at this point. When do you guys think that we could expect Outlast 3 to come out? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts about it in the comment section down below and let us know your thoughts. And with that down and out of the way, guys, I want to say thank you so much to all of you who joined us for this episode of Horror Theory. Guys, I'm going to be coming live to you tomorrow for the Little Nightmares 3 showcase. We'll be doing a live stream out of Zero Dark, where you guys will be able to watch us live tomorrow during the showcase for Little Nightmares 3. I have no idea how long that showcase is going to be, but we're going to be talking about Little Nightmares 3. We'll be talking about other horror games, guys. Obviously, we'll be, of course, talking about State of Decay 3, maybe some Alien Isolation 2, maybe even talk about some horror games that got canceled or never, or were unreleased. Talk about the Callisto Protocol 2. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. Maybe some more about Dead Space 4. I'd love to talk more about Silent Hill F, Resident Evil Requiem, Directive 8020. Love to have some real conversations with you guys about all these different games. There's a lot of things to be really excited about within the horror genre at this point, guys, within gaming. And so we're going to be covering all of those things for you right here on Horror Theory. I hope you guys did enjoy this episode of Horror Theory, guys. And if you guys did, make sure that you leave a thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, stay positive, just keep grinding. And as always, I'll talk to you guys all in the next one. Peace out, guys.